you want me to?
Sorry, Natalie?
Do you want me to have a better background? Do you care?
It's fine. You look fine. You look very officey. But if you want a better background,
If something less visually distracting, if
yeah,
it's
I just put this screen behind me to hide all of the mess, but yours doesn't look messy at all. It looks very nice. So, um, so what I thought we could do is, I like the structure of your presentation, and we're writing one article that's about like not such good goals and how to fix them, and another article where we're going to suggest some really good goals. So I want to kind of use your structure a bit to talk about that. And if you, I know you had in your presentation some goals up on the screen. It would be great if you could share those with me, because I wasn't actually able to go to the whole of your session because I got called out to help in another session. But I saw from the beginning where it was going. I liked it. So if we could just start by you like saying your name and your title, that's a good start.
Hi, my name is Natalie Holdren, and I'm the Extensive Support Needs Credential Coordinator at UC Santa Barbara.
Hi, I'm Andrew Fetters. I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Education and Teacher Education Program at UC Santa Barbara.
Great, thank you. And okay, so if we could start, maybe to begin with, we could start with the question of why it's so important to have great goals in your IEP.
So I think the reason why IEP goals are so important is because legally it's the space where all the team members are supposed to be sitting down and really envisioning what is valuable and important for the student. So I think having high quality IEP goals that actually are going to guide the students' daily programming and incorporate all the ideas that were in place during that planning meeting is really important. And then along with that go things like, are they measurable? Are they meaningful? Are they reflective of the family's goals and values? All of those sorts of considerations.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to?
Yeah, just to expand on that, Natalie mentioned that having measurable goals is important. And I think one of the focuses that we brought to our presentation was really giving teachers a formula to write IEP goals in a way that's actually really concrete, and you can actually kind of plan out when you're actually going to measure the goals. So when you're reporting IEP goal progress during progress monitoring points or during an annual IEP, that you really have a well thought out formula that's going to help you accurately present and explain the progress and the benefit that the student has hopefully gotten out of the goals.
That's great, thank you. So on your sheet, which was great, the first question that you thought about a goal was, does it address the general curriculum or functional objective? So we know on our IEP forms, we mostly have like a checkbox for a curriculum standard, or it says another aspect of the disability. Yeah. Can you sort of explain why that's like the starting point?
Well, I think especially in communities that are passionate about inclusive education, there's been a lot of argument over whether goals should be more academic or more functional. And I think it's important to acknowledge that students are going to have needs in both areas, and that should be a great starting place. Is they should be one or the other, and preferably both.
That's great, thank you. Is there a particularly, can you give us an example of a goal which would be both, and that would be a a good example of a goal?
My favorite sorts of goals are when there are Common Core standards that tie to things like using good judgment, like critical thinking skills. And so I don't have any of the standards memorized. I have a handy app on my phone, but what I will say is that, you know, there are a lot of grade level standards that are about like being able to identify bias in a source, right? And that's really important right now at a time when like people are using social media and kids are trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. And so I think that is such a functional skill, but also an academic goal that could easily be modified for students across all sorts of, you know, varying levels of need. So that would be an example for me of like kind of a high leverage sort of goal that could be really useful.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want to?
No, she just said high leverage, and, you know, I was thinking the word pivotal, where, you know, writing these pivotal goals, and, you know, when you focus on strategies or processes from the standards, you're able to write those much more high leverage and pivotal goals. You know, there's also goals that would be much more about the knowledge or the skills in a standard that could align with the students' present levels and their functional learning too. So, you know, I think the goals Natalie are talking about are the real goals that can kind of impact across areas. Whereas, you know, I'm kind of talking, there are simpler versions where it could just be there's a second grade reading goal and you adapt that for a student's functional reading curriculum.
So the goal should never actually be the standard, right? Like a lot of people get that confused and they think that the standard and the goal should be the same thing. But what's the relationship between the standard and the goal?
So the IEP goals need to reference certain standards. So you would not extract one standard as an IEP goal, though once, you know, again, to go back to Natalie's example, one standard on a pivotal skill that can impact a lot of areas is a good, maybe use the meat of that standard for an IEP goal. But at a kind of entry level to align IEP goals with standards, you don't want to take the entire standard, but when you're crafting the IEP goal, you may want to take certain elements of the standard. It could be the certain skills or content or knowledge in the standard, or it could be the verbs in a standard, like analyze or identify or synthesize. So when we're teaching our teacher candidates how to write IEP goals and align them with standards, we are starting at take language and focus on the verbs or the skills and content of the standard. But a lot of the times it is taking some of the verbs out of the standard that can really help align the IEP goal with the state standard. And you'll be able to check that box.
That's great. Thank you. So the second thing on your handout was, is it functional? Can the skill be used in a student's everyday life? I think Natalie may remember that my son had a goal of identifying a negative number.
There it is.
Very good example, right? But, do you want to explain a little bit about like how that works and how you take something very academic but make it useful?
I do. And I think those first two go in tandem, right? The first one is it academic or is it functional? And then the second one really should say, is it actually functional? Because, you know, I remember starting off in special education and seeing goals written for high school students that were about sorting colored blocks. And, you know, that is only functional if your goal is to work in a sheltered workshop, and only if that sheltered workshop sorts colored blocks. So I think, you know, when we talk about if something, you know, we have this idea that some things are academic and some things are functional, but I would argue that in special education, a lot of things that we call functional are actually not at all functional and can't be used by kids in their real lives. And my big one, if you ask my students like what my big pet peeve is when we teach kids how to count plastic money. you know, like
Knew it.
that is called a functional skill. But now that we have a quarter for every state and territory, is it really functional to be counting plastic money in your special day class, only to go out into the world and have to use real money? And also, how many people are spending a lot of time counting coins? Most of us are using debit cards or Apple Pay or all sorts of other much easier methods of payment. So I think one of the issues in special education is that we tend to get in our own way. You know, we have these ideas that we've perpetuated over years and years about what is functional, and we don't spend enough time thinking like, well, do I do that in my daily life? Like, am I teaching my kids how to do that? Is that something this family thinks is useful? And those are just good questions to ask yourself when you're coming up with a functional goal.
That's great. Thank you. And did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I just have another example. You know, living in Southern California, I inherited some IEPs, and a few students had the same science goal of identifying the weather and determining what kind of clothes to wear, which would include snow and rain and sun and wind. When, you know, well, this year is a different year, but most of the time we're really just having sun or clouds, and an occasional rain. So, you know, that's just another example of a very classic special ed goal that I would kind of reference it that way, but actually not being functional for kids living in Southern California.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. The next one on your list is it generative? And does it help them to learn other useful skills? So is it a prerequisite skill? Generative. That's quite a long word.
This one is really important to me, especially because I'm pretty passionate about literacy instruction for students with extensive support needs. I think a lot of times kids get pigeonholed really young into, oh, you're a sight word kid, or you're a PEX kid, without really making any solid attempt at providing systematic literacy instruction, or even doing assessment of phonemic awareness or all sorts of other skills. So when we say, is it generative, what we mean is it a splinter skill? Is it a skill that you're going to learn that like doesn't really lead to other skills? Or is it a skill that's going to kind of open up other skills to you? And I think phonetic reading is one of the most generative skills there is, because if you can turn letter sounds into words, that gives you tons of opportunity to, you know, be engaged in academics and ride a bus and order food off of a menu and write letters to your friends and family, or more realistically, emails, right? Like text your family. Although of course we have wonderful assistive technology, but just, you know, are we thinking of this one skill in terms of the scope and sequence of all of the other skills that this student is going to want to accomplish over the course of their academic career?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And I'll add that it's a barrier to goals being generative is sometimes our annual IEP goal process, where we write goals each year, and there might be revolving or different special ed teachers from year to year. And Natalie mentioned scope and sequence of skills. There isn't some kind of logical order of learning skills and building skills on top of each other. So I think a limitation of our annual IEP process is sometimes we teach one skill per year, a splinter skill that year, and then the next year we move into a different area of literacy. Maybe we weren't working on fluency and decoding. Maybe one year we were working on fluency and decoding. The next year we decide to do comprehension, and we're not bringing all the skills up at the same time, or building a foundation in earlier years of the annual IEP and looking towards more developed skills in later years of the annual IEP. So that, you know, one of the reasons why long-term planning and person-centered planning is important is to kind of get a long-term picture of where the individual and their family wants them to go, so we can kind of, even at the elementary level, you know, design goals that will be building blocks to get somebody where they want to go in 15 years.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, the parent really is the most consistent member of the IEP team, right?
Yep.
So they're the ones that have to keep that consistency of the plan. The next one on your list is it important to the individual and their family?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we had a good transition. You know what, the point I just made is a good transition here. Like, are we planning with post-school outcomes in mind? And the only way we can plan with that is working with the individual and the family.
Yeah. We really, at UCSB, we're kind of designed around the idea that parents are experts on their children and their families, and we train our candidates to really elevate the family voice in the context of the IEP and the planning. So, you know, if you're teaching an IEP goal that doesn't align with the family's values or doesn't mesh with their hopes, research says that those goals aren't going to maintain, you know, and so what would be the point of that?
That's great, thank you. And the next one, is it age appropriate?
I had a little asterisk on that one, and I like to joke about this because I have plenty of interests that aren't age appropriate. You know, I love those like sushi erasers that break up into little pieces, and my mom collects Barbie dolls from the 50s. So, you know, I say that with an asterisk because we just want to make sure that our goals aren't stigmatizing or alienating our students. Obviously, student choice should be huge in the IEP process, but you know, sorting blocks when you're in high school is just completely inappropriate unless there's some very concrete reason for that to be a goal. So that's kind of what that speaks to.
Did you want to add anything,
And
Andrew?
I think that was spot on.
The next one, number 6, is does it contribute to self-determination?
So
Can
when we
you
talk,
explain a little what you mean by self-determination?
So self-determination is, you know, kind of an umbrella skill that, you know, like Dr. Michael Waymire and Carrie Sjogren have done tons of great work on self-determination. There's a lot of technical assistance centers that have great information on this. So it's something I would recommend, you know, Googling. There's a lot of resources online, but basically self-determination is kind of this umbrella skill, and underneath it are these component skills that really contribute to a person's ability to act as the causal agent in their life, right? Historically, you know, if we think about the institutionalization of people with disabilities, like they were teaching them to not be self-determined because it makes it easier to run an institution. And then there's just been carryover of that, right? I think like not really empowering students to make decisions for themselves, to set goals for themselves, to get them actively involved in thinking about what they want for themselves. So self-determination refers to all those kinds of goals, but what people don't understand is that you have to teach somebody how to be self-determined. We don't just, you know, do it automatically. And so creating goals with self-determination in mind is really important. You know, you could have, and there's great resources for creating self-determination goals across the lifespan. So in a younger student, it might be about like making a choice between a couple of objects and then establishing a preference, right? Like that's a self-determination skill that becomes very functional when you're an adult, is like figuring out what do I like and how do I choose what I like and avoid what I don't like. That's really important in the vocational space, right? And so I think just being thoughtful about teaching self-determination from the get-go, and then in terms of having actual self-determination goals in the IEP, and then scaffolding, so your student is over time getting more and more adept at making more self-determined choices, with, you know, the end goal being that you know, you have to have a lot of self-determination to navigate post-secondary schooling, whether they're inclusive programs or not. So I think we're all kind of working on self-determination.
Andrew, do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
Do you have a good example, a concrete example of what it might be like for like a middle school child or something?
Oh, for a middle school child, and we'd like to, when we're teaching our candidates, we like to have them think about self-determination with all the instruction they're planning. And, for a middle school student, it could be something like goal setting, where it could be a goal for the entire academic year. It could be aligned with you could ask them about their own IEP goals, or you could have them set goals about recreational activities at school, or goals for vocational outcome. I mean, they're in middle school, maybe a job around school or something like that. So goal setting is a great one, because there's, everybody sets goals for themselves in different ways, whether it's, hobbies or fitness goals or career goals and these kind of things. So providing the student an opportunity to make a goal, and which could be over 3 weeks, 3 months, or the entire academic year, it gives the student that opportunity to self-monitor how they're doing, self-evaluate, and all these other self-hyphen skills that we employ to get a student to get to that self-determination outcome.
It's great, but it does bring up another issue, because what we see often from the behaviorists in the IEP room is the goal that says, the kid will be compliant, 8 out of 10 times.
I was just thinking about that, Karen, and I'm glad you brought it up, because we're wrapping up our quarter, and I run into this issue teaching our course right now on functional behavioral assessment and positive behavior supports. And it is really common for students to see someone they're working with an escape behavior, and then write a goal that says this student won't escape. They'll just sit there. And, when I'm talking about this problem, I quote Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer, who I think he was quoting someone else, but he said, we spend the first 2 years of a child's life trying to get them to walk and talk, and the rest of their childhood trying to get them to sit down and shut up. So I use that quote to frame this problem for self-determination. So it does take our candidates a long time to wrap their head around, but if a student has a goal, if the student's exhibiting a behavior that they're avoiding their tasks, we can't write goals that say the student will do their tasks. What the student needs is a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. So the student actually has to find a way to escape their tasks using a behavior that's not disruptive, that's not interfering with their learning. So instead of a student just having to do their work and a goal saying the student will sit down for 5 minutes and work, if the behavior is an escape behavior, the student needs to use something like a break card, or just simply say, I would like a break right now. So you can see the self-determination there. The student is stating what they want. And in the past, it's associated with a disruptive behavior. Now I think it's a big shift in the behaviorist area. And a lot of teachers need to take this new perspective of not just focusing on controlling the behavior that's interfering, but the true purpose of positive behavior support is to create an environment where students are going to use appropriate behaviors, but it still has to be based on the purpose of their behavior. So asking a student to just work when they're trying to escape is not really going to work. You need to teach them exactly what they're trying to do, but in a more appropriate way. And that will add to their self-determination.
Yeah, thank you. The next on your list is, does it contribute to friendship or membership? And that's something that a lot of parents want the IEP to foster a sense of belonging or friendship, and they're not quite sure how to get IEP goals to do that.
Yeah. As a mother, I would tell you that, like, I want my child to be successful at school, but mostly I just want her to enjoy it. And so I think one of the beautiful things about working with students with extensive support needs is it is expected that we're going to care about things like communication, but communication needs to be considered in the context of the reasons why the rest of us communicate, which is to, you know, be members of communities and to engage with those communities. So I just think that you know, it's a really important consideration. And, you know, to jump backwards really quickly, like this checklist is meant to stimulate conversation around goals and decide like if the goals are meaningful enough to make it into the IEP, because, you know, students are learning all sorts of things. They're not only learning what is in the IEP and written down as goals, but I think ensuring that these aspects get captured and kind of elevated because they're in the IEP is really important for programming. And I think, you know, friendship and membership in their community, whether their community is their elementary school or whether it's a community-based program and they're working in the community, those are really the important things that most of us care about, is like being engaged in our communities.
But does it change friendship when you're going to measure it?
I mean, to be honest with you, like a lot of times the reason why, when I was a teacher, the reason why I wrote goals was to ensure that I was holding other people accountable for the values that our IEP team had. And so I think that if there's an IEP goal that says that the student is going to be engaging with other students during recess, that's the only way that you are for sure going to know that people are going to be thoughtful about that time. So I think of IEP goals as ways of like, you know, elevating what's important in that child's programming. And I think, you know, does it cheapen a friendship if you have a data sheet? I don't think the kids care.
Sorry, I'm just gonna let my cat in because it's making.
Oh, I need to let the Chihuahua in too. She's been scratching. Little cat intermission, dog intermission.
They somehow know
there she is.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So there it was. Number 8. Does it compete with challenging responses or behaviors? So, and obviously the teachers are writing some goals, and then there's behaviorists writing some goals, and there's speech therapists, and the AT person writes a goal, and you're all collaborating. And how do you make sure that you're not all kind of writing something that competes with each other and overwhelming the kid?
Well, I think,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Just the strength of your IEP team, you know, we emphasize with our candidates, you know, one of the more challenging parts of being a new teacher is the networking and the having the network skills and the ability to adapt to a school district's practices, because not every school district organizes their IEPs in the same way, but have an underlying approach of collaboration so they can, you know, have pre-meetings before IEPs and hold people accountable, though it's hard as a new teacher to hold people accountable, but try to set deadlines for getting goals in. So, and having the kind of trust and rapport with your colleagues to hold them accountable. So these kind of problems don't occur.
So from the parents' point of view, like if you, is there, for example, if the OT and the teacher both suggest like a goal that's very similar for writing, would you suggest that you ask them to combine it and work together?
I would. I mean, the other thing about IEPs is that you don't want them to be redundant, because the more people working on one goal, the better. And I think people underutilize that section on the IEP that says like, who's going to work on this? You know, I've had some really great collaborations with my speech therapist around, I was teaching letter sound correspondence, and they were working on, articulation and giving me very concrete strategies for how to teach letter sounds in ways that kids were really receptive to. So, instead of having multiple goals that don't, that are being worked on on islands, being able to partner on goals and have you both be collecting data and doing intervention is, I think, a best practice.
That's great. Yeah. And then also you may have data in different environments, right? Like if you have the data in the general ed environment and the data, that's a common question where people find that the speech therapist is saying they're meeting all their goals in the speech room, but the general ed teacher still hasn't heard them speak. So
yeah, definitely. And, we talk about this a lot, but oftentimes the way that services are being delivered are more about benefiting the system than they are about benefiting kids. So, obviously, if you're trying to learn how to communicate with peers, the ideal place to do that is with your peers. But also, speech therapists have incredibly large caseloads and students with very diverse needs. So, it's a systems challenge too.
The last thing is about this idea of pivotal, and I know that's really key to what you were working on. Can you try and explain exactly what is pivotal, and can you maybe give examples of things that aren't, that you could then change to be pivotal?
So first off, I just want to say that this notion of pivotal came out of a recent article in the TEAS journal, Teacher Education and Special Education, and the authors were colleagues of mine from CASH, Andrea Rupar, Jenny Kurth, and some of their colleagues. So it's not my term, but it basically, what they were saying is that, we have all these arguments about should it be academic, should it be functional, and instead of that, we should be wondering, is it pivotal? And by pivotal, what they're meaning is it going to help students with skills that will benefit them in future environments that we haven't even anticipated yet, right? I think a lot of people in general ed will say we're preparing our kids for a world that we don't even know yet, right, in terms of technology. And so that's kind of the idea that we're bringing to IEP goals, is that a lot of times IEP goals are so focused on these discrete skills that occur in these very specific environments. And really the more pivotal skills are like, what do you do in an emergency? Or what do you do when things don't work out the way that you want them to? And so an example from my own practice recently is I'm working with a teacher candidate who's helping a student who is in his 20s in a transition program learn how to ride the bus independently. But he is a student whose family has not been interested in getting him a smartphone. And so the pivotal kind of IEP skill that they wanted to target early on was, how do you ask for help if something bad happens while you're out in the community navigating the bus? Like, what if the bus breaks down? What if you fell asleep and you end up on the wrong stop? And so for me, one component of pivotal is like, how does it help you, like a skill that will give you a strategy to be successful in an environment that has unknowns, I guess. But I think there's a lot of other examples too.
Yeah, I'll just add some other examples. Executive functioning is one area that is where you can get a lot of different pivotal skills. So, you're asking like, what's one version of an IEP goal, and then what's a more pivotal version? You could have an IEP goal that says the student will follow directions on their math worksheet and complete it with 80% accuracy. But you could write a more pivotal goal that might work across areas that says the student will learn to read directions across content areas and determine the best approach to start, work on, and complete an activity. Now, they're still following directions like we were with that math worksheet, but we just wrote a goal that we can really do at any time with academic work or with vocational work or even with rec leisure and hobbies and these kind of things.
Yeah. I'll give another one that's more tied to literacy. So I think that a lot of times goals around literacy will hit the standards in these very kind of discrete ways. Like student will be able to answer who, what, when, where, why questions about a passage, right? But then when you get, that might work for a reader in elementary school where they're anticipating that you're going to be answering those questions. But when a student gets into the higher grades, it might be more functional to like teach them how to figure out the meanings of words they're unfamiliar with, right? Like noting a word is bolded and understanding that that means that there's a definition for that word in the back, or noting that at the beginning of the textbook, there's an outline and that outline highlights what the author thought were the most important things about the story. Or for a more inclusive sort of non-academic goal, we see these goals that are like the student will pay attention to the general ed teacher with no more than blah, blah, blah prompts, when really, a goal that would be much more functional is the student will look at their peers if they don't know what they're doing and use visual information to get themselves on track, right? Like things that like reading the environment is so much more functional than like relying on an instructional assistant to count how many prompts they're giving you.
That's great. Yes. Thank you. And so I guess the last question would be like, if a parent, when you're teaching the teachers how to do this, what do teachers expect from parents? Because quite often people talk about parents coming to IEPs with goals, and some people say, well, the teachers are supposed to write the goals. And what should a parent expect for being able to actually propose their own goals or rewrite the ones that the teachers come up with?
We work in I work primarily with candidates who are working with students with extensive support needs. And what that means is they're not trying to juggle caseloads of 28 students like other special education teachers are. And that gives us a little, I think, flexibility to be much more prescriptive about how to partner with families. And so what I suggest for our candidates is that they have a conversation a couple of weeks before the IEP with the family where they are talking about the progress that the student has already made and anticipating what goals would be valuable to go into the next round that is collaborative with the family. And I would love to say that all special education teachers should be able to do that. I wish they could, but like I said, there's a little bit of luxury in having a smaller number of students, but we teach our candidates to do that.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, we do consider it a best practice. And my background and where I'm coming from and most of my experience is also in extensive support needs, but I am teaching classes on IEPs to students with to teacher candidates getting their mild moderate credential. And they'll, like Natalie said, they're going to have less opportunity to meet with parents. But maybe on the flip side, they have less IEP goals to write, so maybe they could have a quicker dialogue emailing parents about IEP goals. Because overall, we want parents to know about the proposed goals before the IEP meeting, have an opportunity to share goals that they might have for the student that the teacher could incorporate to their next round of annual IEP goals. So, I mean, that's really a best practice. And like Natalie said, with caseloads and all the demands out there, it can be a challenge. But the other thing I would say to parents is to remember, as part of your procedural safeguards, is that the IEP goals can't be predetermined. Like, you can show up to a meeting and, in the old days, we're supposed to write on the goal sheets the goals in the meeting, and so just as part of your procedural safeguards and due process and all these things, parents need to remember that these IEP goals shouldn't be predetermined. So if you didn't have an opportunity to meet with your teacher, that you still have those rights in the meeting. And of course, there's a power dynamic and all these things built into the IEP meeting and the IEP in general that can be a challenge for lots of different families. But just trying to know your rights and hold on to that right around predetermination, and know that in the meeting, it is okay to change the goals and that it shouldn't be any other way.
I'll just add one more thing. So my dissertation was about creating simulated IEP meetings as a context for teacher candidates to practice running what I kind of call family-friendly IEP meetings. And so our candidates have practice using an IEP agenda and thinking through ways to be a productive partner with the family member in the meeting. A lot of times candidates are so nervous when they're running their first IEP meetings that they're just checking the boxes, and it's not because they aren't lovely people or because they don't care about what families want, but that's a pretty high stress, high stakes situation for a new educator who's performing in front of an administrator. And so we try to give them practice and help them be really intentional about focusing on the relationship with the family and ensuring that the family's needs are embedded into the IEP. And I just think that's a practice that a lot of educators could benefit from.
That's wonderful. Thank you. This is, I think, going to be a great, well, I think we might have like 3 articles out of it, but, I think it takes a little time to edit and make the clips. And then if I can send it to you and you review it, and then after you review it, it kind of gets posted very quickly, because at that point they're like, come on, we need it posted. So that would be great. And Natalie, could you share when you did the slideshow, you had examples of goals? I'd love to use some of those examples.
Yeah, I'll send you the PDF of the presentation.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Karen.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.